Healthy churches get checkups. We'll tell you how today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, A.J. Mathieu.
Here I am, back again.
Yes, indeed. We're at it. Today we're talking about assessing and improving church health through regular checkups. I have a checkup coming up at the release of this episode. Within a couple of weeks, I've got a regular doctor's appointment. Last year, I missed my annual physical because I was out of town for work, and then I didn't reschedule it. And then, unsurprisingly, there are a couple of things that I was like, I think I might need to chit-chat with my doctor about this thing. And it was just a good reminder that you shouldn't let these things stack up. Like, little things become big things the longer you wait. And they don't necessarily go away on their own until you give attention to them.
Golly.
The same thing is true in church health, right? You ignore a problem, it's not going to fix itself, right? Like the laws of thermodynamics are at play as it relates to your church as well. Things don't spontaneously become more organized. So if you perceive or sense, if you've got some sort of sense of disease, like, ooh, this thing is hurting, ooh, there's just this pain point, you can't ignore it away. You need a regular checkup in order to diagnose, where is this symptom coming from? Why am I feeling this way? Why is my church not seeing the fruit that it should have? And if you are like, well, what would that look like? That's what this episode is about. Here's a tool and a process you can use to help stay healthy.
Okay. All right, man. So last week, talking about rest. This week, talking about checkups. Neither of which I do. Both of which my wife wish I did. And so 2 weeks in a row, I'm getting called out on the podcast.
Yeah, man. Do I just need to pray for you? Like, do we need an intervention? Do I need a banner behind me?
All I do is sit at this desk. This is what I do. I sit on this desk, and then I get on airplanes.
And then you get on an airplane.
I fly really far away. And then I come back to this desk. That's my life.
All right. So everybody listening to the podcast, last week we said we're all going to hold AJ accountable to taking a few weeks off this year and resting with his family. We're also going to make sure he goes to the doctor.
Oh, man. Golly. None of this sounds good.
You have insurance.
I like the idea of any of
this.
The
annual physical is free. You have no excuse.
I did go to the doctor last year. I went. Yeah.
Were you like
planning on going back again? But
you watch Parks and Rec?
See, I align my doctor's visits like a sabbatical. I go every 7 years.
Every 7 years.
I take a couple hours off. I go to the doctor every 7 years. That's what I do.
Did you watch Parks and Rec? Were you a fan of that?
Never. No. I'm not going to know most episodes.
There's a whole
is it podcast worthy, Scott?
Oh my goodness. Oh well, there is a really funny, and I can't crack all the jokes because there wouldn't be appropriate, and this is a family podcast. But there's an episode where Andy Dwyer goes to the doctor for the first time ever because he has insurance and he didn't realize that he has insurance, and he talks about, like, he gives the doctor all the things that are hurting, and he's like some of these are symptoms and some of these are just you. And it's very funny. You can find it on the internet. So you saying, hey, I don't go to the doctor until there's a real problem reminds me of that episode.
I'll YouTube it, or I'll wrap tape around it until it stops bleeding. That's it. That's how we fix things around here.
That is a terrible approach to life. All right. Let's move on.
We're going to talk. We have a tool.
You wouldn't recommend that to somebody when it comes to their church. You wouldn't be like, just duct tape that problem in your church.
That's true. Do never make decisions based on how I act, only how I speak.
I feel like we've done enough podcasts now that we're just drawing. This is one of the kind of long running things. If you're a long time listener to this podcast, is I'm very transparent. I'll tell you more than you want to know about me. AJ, not so much, but we've recorded so many episodes of the podcast in the last week that now we're getting to the point of vulnerability. Who knew? We just needed to record a lot of podcasts over a few days to get.
But because of that, we're about to have a
confident
podcast sabbatical. We're not gonna record one for the next month and a half now, and I'm gonna be buttoned back up. No one's gonna know me again after this.
Just totally guarded. Yeah.
Okay. All right. In an unguarded moment here, we have a checkup tool we call the Church Ministry Analysis, or CMA for short. So we're gonna tap into that as a reference as we go through this episode. You don't have to use our service in that.
It's cheap,
but
though.
I think it is cheap. You should use it.
You should use it. There's no reason not to use it. I think. Let me just say this too before we get into kind of what we cover in the CMA. What makes this church ministry analysis unique to other things you might find is that it isn't generated by a computer. You don't fill out the survey, we feed it into a system, and then the system spits out a spool of information. It's done by a human, which is different. So it's an actual consulting service that we provide. It's not just like a report that's generated. Another thing that's different about what we do is that ours doesn't compare you to other churches. So you can go on, and I won't mention names, but any number of these church health assessments are going to give you scores based on how you compare to an average or how you compare to high performing churches or whatever. And we don't do that. We only compare you towards standards of biblical health. And that we think is more important than comparing you to how some other church did. So, yeah, all right. Just wanted to give some reasons why I think ours is better than other people's.
Yeah.
And why $99, which is what it costs to go through it when you're getting a consulting service, it's really a bargain.
Yeah. All right. So in general, so what we're talking about is really just checking the health of the church. I mean, the big idea here on this episode is that we should not continuously just cycle Sunday after Sunday, year after year after year, without first kind of coming up with a baseline of health and then monitoring it with some regularity. I mean, we preach this in having a dashboard and metrics for progressing in church health throughout our strategic envisioning process as it relates to discipleship and outreach. But the same thing is true just overall in the ministry. We should have an idea of what does health look like in a healthy church and in our church, and how are we doing in these key areas. So having a system for that that's what we're recommending to you today, that you would have a system for that. Much like, the going to the doctor personally. I guess, I don't know. What's the recommendation, Scott? Annually? We're supposed to get a checkup once a year?
That's how often that the insurance will pay for
it. That's what we should be doing in our churches is annually. Let's just get a checkup on some things. So you have more to say about that, or do you want to jump into the areas of evaluation?
Yeah, I think we should go into the areas of evaluation, and we're going to touch on these just so very briefly. And I want to point you to episodes. It would be 223, 224, 225, 226, 227. I think that's it.
That was from early. We started off this year kind of returning to some foundational things, and we walked through the components of a healthy church, which we align in our process called strategic envisioning.
Right.
And our church ministry analysis also aligns with those. We have tools that are intended to work together.
Yes.
So we will link those in this article that you'll find this week at malfersgroup.com/247. And
Right.
each of these components you can link back to and go deeper, take a deeper dive on.
Right. So we'll kind of say what they are real briefly. I'll also tell you the kind of some of our more recent episodes, 240, 241, 42, 43, 44, and 45 are all about leadership pipeline. And that's another area. Leadership culture is another thing that we evaluate. So there's like 10 or 11 episodes from within the last year, since January of this year, that would be really helpful for helping you understand what health looks like, from all of these facets. But we're just going to extremely briefly touch on what each of these are right
Yeah. That'll be your playlist for your sabbatical to get through all this.
now.
The key areas of evaluation, we always start with this. We believe it is the key foundational point, and that's the Great Commission. Our belief, and we would expect most of you to agree with this, that as believers and collectively as churches, we are called to make and mature disciples of Jesus, rooted in the Great Commission. And so for our church to vary from that ends up being, over time, sometimes less, sometimes more, an area of unhealth whenever we lose that Great Commission focus. And that can manifest itself in a variety of ways. But we deal with a lot of churches that are in an unhealthy state. And this is a foundational piece to realign first before working through other things. So it's the first thing that we work on, and it's the first thing that we teach and train through to get the church realigned.
Yeah. The second thing that we look at is around our core values. And again, I'm always so cautious here because it's easy to say, well, we want to measure mission, vision, values. Okay, there's some nuance to this and some ways that we approach this that are really important and maybe different from ways you've been thinking about it. So as it relates to our values, we're thinking about what should a discipleship-focused Great Commission church value in light of what we see in a biblical model in Acts chapter 2 and throughout the New Testament. Healthy churches. What do healthy discipleship-oriented churches value? Which is a different question than what do we value generally, or what are our core values? Those are different questions. And so, when we evaluate your values, then we're evaluating them in light of a biblical model of discipleship-oriented values.
Yeah.
So we're kind of doing a gut check on if your church values discipleship, I ought to see these kinds of behaviors lived out in your church. So that's what we're measuring in the values section.
That's right. Actionable values, not just concepts and ideas. So we take that into step 3, and that is discipleship pathway. And basically, a discipleship pathway in the church is an intentional structure for living out our values. We say we value X, Y, Z, prove it. Show us. And so we are organizing the ministries of the church to live out what we say we value. Again, actionable core values that we see in places like Acts chapter 2. And so the discipleship pathway is one of the areas that we spend the most time on. It has the most pieces to it. It requires the most discussion and prayerful consideration. But it's where we become very, very intentional in the desired outcomes that we want in helping people mature in their faith as followers of Christ. And the characteristics of being a mature disciple, the behaviors that we would exhibit, the priorities that we put on the activities of our life, and how we spend our time. It all comes back to that. The mission obviously is vitally important, but our behavior and everything that we do as believers comes back to this piece, the discipleship pathway. And so it's a huge component of our process, of our strategic envisioning process. And again, one of the areas that we measure in our church ministry analysis.
Our next section that we evaluate is vision. So this would be if you're keeping track, the 4th thing. There are 6 things. This is number 4. Is vision. So vision is a question of have we established as a congregation where exactly we are going? So we know what we're about. We're about making disciples, but as we've established, every church ought to be about making disciples, but what does it mean for us to be successful in our context, in the place where we live, given the challenges of our particular church, of our particular community, of our particular, with the particular resources that we have, with the particular people that we have, given all of those very unique dynamics, what impact are we called to have? And so it's about, do we have a shared picture of God's future for our church as it can and must be? And if we don't have that um, defined and articulated, then we're going to be working at different ends, towards different ends. So the analogy I use, and you've heard me say it before on the podcast, or repeat myself, it's not enough to agree on to going on a road trip. You have to articulate to where. And if we're not clear on that, then we're going to waste a lot of time and a lot of energy. And this is where a lot of churches get stuck. So we are measuring how clear, how compelling, and how shared is your vision.
Yeah. The fifth piece in this is our strategies. What exactly are we doing to accomplish goals? And the key word here again is intentionality. That we're intentionally setting things for ourselves, setting goals for us to achieve, developing plans for achieving those goals, executing on them, measuring our progress in fulfilling those. Also, I want to point out strategy and vision are the two pieces out of all. We got one more after this, leadership, but these 6 things, strategy and vision, are the two most changeable things. They're the things that will have the most adjustment to them as the years go by. Our mission should never change. We might express it differently. Our values should never change. We might talk about them slightly differently. For the most part, they're not going to change. Our discipleship pathway will change over time. Are the foundational concepts of how we're trying to help people mature don't, but the ministries inside that process will.
Right.
But our vision over not every year, but over a series of years, pursuing something bigger, eventually will make progress and even achieve big vision goals. So it will reset, but our strategy really every year, because we suggest strategic initiatives be aligned, probably not more than a year or so. There's some variation to that, but really once a year, we need to be saying, okay, well, we had goals. How do we do? Where'd we end up? What do we need to do now for this next year? So strategy is one of the pieces that gets the biggest refresh annually.
Yep. And then the last component, so we would call those are the 5 things that we're working on in the strategic envisioning process. Great Commission focus, discipleship core values, discipleship pathway, vision, clarity, and strategy objective selection. So those would be foundational pieces of church health. The 6th piece is the thing that sort of powers that engine. So think of those first 5 things as like the vehicle, and think of the 6th thing, which is the leadership culture, as the fuel. If you don't have fuel in that car, you're not going to go anywhere. And leadership drives the strategic vehicle forward. And so we have, it's actually the biggest section in the report is measuring leadership culture and the health of that. So do we have a pipeline for leaders? Do we have processes for developing leaders? Do we have good structure in place? All of those things. And so those are the 6 things we're measuring, and we'll give you a baseline score on each of those things in light of how your team responds to the questions that we ask, or not questions, they're statements that people will agree or disagree to. And it's not a church-wide survey. You'll select a certain group of people to go through it. People, known leaders, people of influence, people who really understand. Yeah, leadership-oriented folks who know how things work. And it's based on their responses is how the score is calculated. So it's not subjective on our part. Our analysis is subjective, but the score is not. The score is just a formula. You responded this way, it calculates this score. And then we synthesize that data and go, okay, well, here are the areas where you're weak. Here are the areas where you're strong. Here are the areas that need some attention. Here are some of the areas that you probably can defer some attention on. We can, it's not just purely based on the numbers. We might say, well, this score is a little bit higher, but it seems to be the root cause problem of why this thing is really low. So we've seen a lot of these, so we tend to be able to notice patterns, and we'll be able to articulate to you why things are the way they are.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the benefits of doing, an annual evaluation of your ministry that is repeatable. I think you get the most bang out of evaluating things similarly year after year, bringing as much objectivity as you can, because you want to over years, of course, you want to see a trend line, but you want to be able to get that snapshot of how are we doing. It's been a year since we've talked, questioned ourselves in these areas. How are we doing over time? As I said, you could have a trend line begin to form. This is very slow. Obviously, this is high level leadership stuff here. This is big picture, long range outlook, to say, we're going to do something one time a year, because we want to start seeing what the trend is after year 3, 5, out there. We've been doing this 10 years. Look at the trend line that we have here. But I think, one of the other key benefits of this is it changes what your attention is, that's kind of the biggest thing. We want you focusing on particular areas of church health that are going to be beneficial to building disciples that become disciple makers. So that's a major benefit. I mean, it's been said by various leaders, how what you measure affects your behavior, and I believe that's completely true. That what you measure is where you end up focusing your attention. So the question then is, are we paying it most attention and measuring the most important things? Because it would be easy to get off track, measure less important things, or even unhealthy things, and pretend like, oh, this is good. So yeah, we want to focus on healthy things.
All right. Our last kind of key point for this is to talk about, what do you do with it? It's a little bit like, kind of using the doctor analogy here. You go to the doctor's office, they measure your weight, they take your blood, do all these things. What do I do with this? And the reality is, when it comes to churches, the ball's in your court. And we've all done it. We have all gone to the doctor's office and they're like, hey, that cholesterol is a little high. And they're like, you should really lay off the French fries. And then, so maybe for a couple weeks you do, and then you're like, but I love French fries. And then you shouldn't be surprised when you come back the next year and your cholesterol is still a little bit high. Or maybe you go, hey, my blood pressure has been elevated for 3 years. They recommended a prescription. Maybe you start taking that prescription. Maybe you start taking the medicine, and you start to see a change because you're making some lifestyle changes and taking the medicine. Similarly, you're going to have full control over what you do next. We'll make recommendations to you and say, hey, maybe we'll recommend go through the strategic envisioning process. It will help you in a comprehensive way. But we're not going to recommend that every year, because once you've gone through that, you don't need to necessarily do that every year. So we might go, hey, you need to put some extra attention in going back to some of these discipleship things, or hey, some extra attention in what we're doing in engaging guests. And the key thing is that you need to understand the results, prioritize the findings. You're not going to be able to solve every problem in 1 year. You're just not going to be able to do that. So what's the most urgent issue? Prioritize that, create an action plan around it, and then start communicating those changes. So when you communicate the changes, then you're able to point to something relatively objective like the church ministry analysis and say, hey, we've been doing this for 3 years, and we see that we're continuing to have a low score here. We continue to need to grow in this particular aspect of our health as a church. And so we're putting extra attention here by diverting these resources, or putting this team together, or initiating this project. And then you have something you can point to, so that people aren't like, hey, whoa, why are we making this change? You can say, we're making this change based on this assessment. And wouldn't it be good for us if we were healthier in this way?
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. If you're interested in our church ministry analysis, you can go to malforsgroup.com/CMA. Is that right, Scott?
Yeah,
/CMA.
CMA.
And excuse me, there's more information there. You can sign up for it there online, and we can get that started for you. I also want to point out that when your church chooses to partner with us as a mission partner in our Gideon initiative, which you can go to malforsgroup.com/Gideon, we'd love to do a CMA for you annually while you're a mission partner with us. So that's just an added benefit to your church. So yeah, go to malforsgroup.com/Gideon. That funds the ministries that we do outside North America. And when built out and funded, also will help increase the number of grant that we'll be able to offer here within the United States as well, to help with churches that need the help but don't have the resources to be able to have us come in. So there we go. This was episode 247 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. Man, coming up on 250 here pretty soon. That'll be a milestone.
No, yeah.
malforsgroup.com/247 is where this week's article is. You can get the YouTube link over there as well. And we'll be back with you again next week with another fresh topic. Ready to go?
You know what the average length of a podcast is? The average number.
The average number of episodes
in a podcast.
You could tell us now, or should we hold that? Should we hold that for a big episode?
Maybe you think I should? You think I should? I'll hold
build the suspense.
I'll build the suspense, or people will just Google it.
Yeah, nobody Google it between now and episode 250.
Forget I said anything, and we'll bring it up in a few weeks.
I don't know what it is. But you know what? I don't know. I'm pretty proud of our podcast. I'm going to say we're in a small percentage that has done this many episodes.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'll just tell you that.
I'm looking forward to hearing what that is in 2 weeks. We'll see you guys there. Don't miss it.